Hello everyone, I'm going to go over how to put together your pixelation in Tahoma2D to make it into an actual animation. The first step when you open is to choose a project to work with. It's going to be Sandbox by default, but we want to choose our own location so that it's not saving within the app and that it's easier to access our work when we need it. So if I click on New Project, it's going to automatically create something in Documents. You can change the location if you want to, but otherwise just give it some sort of name. And I am going to just call this demo and okay. Now a project can hold a single scene or it might hold a collection of related scenes like episodes in a TV show or different scenes that make up an episode or something to that effect. My scene itself should have some sort of descriptive name so that I know what it is when I come back to it later on. And I'm just going to leave all of the defaults and create scene. So here's a brief introduction to the workspace. We have a toolbar on the far left, and depending on what tool is active, you have tool options across the top. We have access to colors and brushes over here when we need them. Depending on what level is active, and I'll talk more about levels in a moment, we have a level palette that's related to the specific animation asset. We have a quick toolbar over here where we can customize the tools that are available or commands that are available for easy, quick access. Then we have a timeline here at the bottom. The timeline is where we can see our animation assets in relationship to each other, like what's on top, what's down below, what comes first, what comes next. And so we have layers that contain levels. So levels are the animation assets themselves. A level might be a single image that's stretched out over a long period of time. It might be a sequence of images that are related, so like our pixelation images. It could be an audio file, a note file. There are all sorts of different level types that you can have. So levels are just the animation assets themselves. The layers are where they're actually placed. Up here we have the viewer, which shows us what's active on the current frame. You can zoom in and out just by dragging your finger on the mouse. We have the level strip on the right, and this will show the current level that's active, and so all of the different frames that make it up. But when this is active, you're going to see the level in the viewer by itself without the entire scene as a whole. And to reverse that, you just click back into the timeline, and then you'll see the entire scene with the full context. We have across the top right a variety of different workspaces that you can change between. These are called rooms. History panel right here so that you can go back and forth between whatever step you happen to be on. All right, to get started, I'm going to add my title. I'm just going to right click on this cell right here and choose load level. I'm going to find my image location. I'm going to start with my title. I'm just going to get that loaded. It's going to ask to import or load. Loading will load your file from the location it already is. Importing brings it into the project itself. And I usually like to do that to keep all of my files together. And then it also ends up giving me a backup of the file in case there's ever a problem. So I'm going to import. Now you can see the red boundary of the camera is actually not the size of my image. So I'm going to take a moment to correct that. So I have the Animate Tool active at the moment, so it's this one at the top. The shortcut is A, and it has a variety of modes that I can change between. And so I'm just going to position my image so that the title, I have a little bit of a typo there, oh well, so that the title is sort of centered. If I want to see just what's in the camera, I can switch my view at the top right of the viewer. So we have the camera stand view where you can see everything, a 3D view where we're looking for more of an angle, and then a camera view where you're seeing exactly what shows in the camera, and you can lower or raise the opacity depending on what's helpful there, just for better context. So now I can see what I'm actually going to be looking at. I like that. If you need to change the scale, you can do that as well. Keep in mind when you're using the Animate tool, it's actually intended for making transitions. If I just have used it once, you can see the little keyframe icon here in the timeline. I've just used it once, it's going to apply to my entire layer. If I use it multiple times, it'll be creating a transition between the different states. Now I need to decide how long I want my title to last for. So think about how long it takes to actually read. I definitely want a few seconds, so at some point, and actually, as far as that goes, the default frame rate is 24 frames per second. So I know that 24 frames is 1 second, 48 is going to be 2 seconds. So I'm going to do, I don't know, maybe 72. That sounds good. So I'm just going to click here, and in the command bar or the quick toolbar, depending on what you want to call it, there is this little icon with an X going through it. That adds a stop hold so that that image stops displaying after that point. I can always click and drag on it to slide it somewhere else if I actually want to end on 72. Maybe I should have added on 73. And now that's just going to last for the full amount of time that I'm telling it to. So I have my layer header over here. I'm just going to right click on that once it's active and insert above to add another layer. Right where my stop frame hold is on that new layer, I'm going to just right click and load level. I'm going to grab my pixelation. Because of the naming format, it recognizes this is a sequence of images with 163 frames. So I'm just going to load that. And again, I always import. So now if I play through, we can see the title. Maybe it's a little long, I might change that. And then the pictures of my pixelation. I'm going to wait a little bit before I actually add the credits. I'm going to do a little bit of adjusting and refining up here first. So there are a lot of things that we can do. All right, I'm going to select my entire pixelation level. So I'm just clicking on the first cell and sliding over to the right, holding down on Shift, clicking on the last cell, and see that everything is highlighted. So I feel like the lighting could be sort of improved in my image, so I'm just going to come to the Levels menu, and under Adjust, there are two things that I might change: Adjust Levels or the Brightness and Contrast. So with Levels, we get this little dialog here. There we go. And this represents the range of values in the image. So you can see I have this large waveform here, and then there's a little bit of information on the right, but it's pretty isolated. So if I drag this over, that's probably going to be a little bit more accurate. I can also adjust the dials on the bottom to control the darks and lights as a whole. So I think that that's definitely improved. This is going to apply to whatever I have selected, which is why I selected my entire level. So I'm just going to click on Apply, and it's 163 images, so it's going to take a little bit of time. And there we go. The other thing is under Level and then Adjust Brightness and Contrast. And so this just provides some dials where I can change the brightness and the level of contrast as a whole. In this case, it's not something that I think I actually need, so I'm just going to close out without applying. All right, now I'm just going to think that my title was a little bit too long, so I'm going to select, I don't know, maybe up to 50. I'm going to select this range just by clicking and dragging across both layers, and that gives me this little drag handle. And notice that I can actually slide what's in front of this back. So I'm going to come up to 50. I'm going to just play that through. Take a look at the timing. All right, maybe a little bit longer for the title, but not super long. All right, I think that looks pretty good. Now, I feel like the pacing of my pixelation itself is pretty good. If I wanted to speed it up, either the entire thing or in sections, what I can do is select whatever I'm trying to select. So I'm going to select the entire range, but this could just be a smaller selection. So clicking on the first frame, shift clicking on the last frame, and I don't really need to scroll back, but what I can do is set this to 1s, 2s, or 3s. So if I'm on 2s, this is going to slow down because every frame, well, every image is going to display for 2 frames. If it's 3s, every image would be displaying for 3 frames. So it'll slow things down. If I put it back to 1s, it'll go back to what it was before. I can also alternatively in the context menu just right click on the level, and then I have a bunch of different options. I can put a step of 2, 3, or 4. So every 2 frame, well, every image displaying twice or 3 times or 4 times, and then I can just keep increasing or decreasing depending on the need. I could also remove some of the frames so that it speeds up. So I might do every 2 frames or just every 3rd frame or every 4th frame. So lots of different things that I can do depending on what I want this to be. Reframe will just set it to 1s, 2s, or 3s no matter what the current setting is, and that's actually the command that's over here. And now just a couple other things. You can click on a cell or selection to drag it to a new location. Sometimes you'll want to click outside of a selection if you want to change to focusing on somewhere else. If things are in the wrong order, you can use standard shortcuts, so Command C, Command V to copy and paste, or Command X to cut. If I just delete, it's going to leave space behind. If I cut with Command X, the image gets replaced. So I'm just going to undo that with Command Z, and again I can always come over to the history panel to undo any number of steps from there. A couple other things in terms of adjusting the order. So W to slide forward or Q to slide backwards on the selection. So that can be helpful sometimes. All right, I think I'm at the point where I'm ready to add my credits. So I'm just going to come to this last frame here. I'm going to add a stop frame hold, and I could either come over here and insert a new layer to put it up there, or I can come down to the one that I have for the title. Sort of a matter of personal preference. If you might need to do some sizing adjustments that are different between the two, that's something to consider. But I think I'll be okay just working in the same layer with the same scale. So I'm just going to right click, load level, grab the frame for the end, load, import, and now I have it here for the end. I think I do, with the Animate tool, want to adjust the position. So I can manually drag, or if I want to be really precise, I can come over here and just drag on the label. Now, notice that I actually have a couple of different, well, I have this line here, so I actually created a transition because I had the position set differently over there. So I'm just going to undo the last couple steps with Command Z, and I think I am going to add a new layer to put this into. So I'm just going to click over on one of the layer headers, insert above, I'm just going to drag this up there. Now I can go back in with the Animate tool, changing the position so that I'm not actually getting a transition, or it looks like it copied the keyframe at the same time. So I'm just going to click back on the first keyframe and delete it. I don't really need it. Now notice this little marker here is on the corner. That's the playback range, so it's only going to show my credits to frame 218 unless I do something different. So I can just drag this out to another location depending on how long I want this to last for. Now, your credits should actually have the names of your team members, so keep that in mind. So I'm just going to experiment with some different ranges, maybe up to 260. So I can go back to the start, play through. That's enough time to read both my title and my credits, so I think things look pretty good. I do want to mention, if you feel like the timing as a whole of everything is just too fast or too slow, you can make changes to the FPS. So again, we have 24 frames per second, which is the standard for animation, but you could go maybe as low as 12 if you wanted to really slow things down. Or you could do a higher number if you want to speed things up. Now, something I want to mention is that changing the FPS here in the viewer is just for testing out different frame rates. It's not actually going to change it in the actual animation. So to do that, I need to come over to scene settings, and then I can change the frame rate from here. One last thing I want to mention, the camera is actually the perfect size for my photos. That may or may not be the case for yours. So if the camera is a different size and you want to fix it and actually make it the size of the photos themselves with whatever level you're working on, if you have it active, you can come up to the scene menu, then camera settings, and then if you just use current level settings, it resizes the camera to be the size of the active image. And so in this case, I've used the Animate tool to move it a little bit lower, so it's not quite right. I'm going to undo that because I actually wanted the other side. So I'm just going to come, oh, you know what, it looks like that's not undoable. That's fun. So I'm just going to come back over to the level with my photos and scene, camera settings, use current settings to get back there. Right, when you're completely satisfied with your result, your timing is great, you have the right frame rate, camera size is ideal, you have your title, you have your pixelation images, and then you have your credits. Everything's lasting for the right amount of time. You can come up to render. And actually, before you do this, I highly recommend that you save, so just Command S. And actually, as far as that goes, I'm going to recommend enabling a preference. So if we come up to Tahoma2D and then Preferences, there are some saving options here. I have autosave on for an interval of 7 minutes. It's going to be off by default and probably for 15 minutes. I recommend changing the settings so that in case there's an issue while you're working, that it's all set. But beyond that, when you're ready to render, so rendering is generating the actual animation itself, putting everything together in whatever format you have set, you can either do a fast render to MP4 and that'll just save on the desktop for you, or you can come over to the output settings. It's going to save in the output folder of the project by default, but you can change that to a new location if that's something that you want to do. You can give it a name ahead of time. You can choose the format, so there are a variety of formats you can choose with. For your pixelation, I recommend either the movie or MP4 format, and then save and render or render, and it'll render to that location with all of the settings that you chose. So I'm just going to do a fast render to MP4. Now, it may not seem it, but this is actually very fast compared to when we do rendering in Blender later on. So fast. So we just need to let this go through, and then when you're finished, make sure that you open up your video file, just test the playback, make sure everything looks the way that you expect it to. If you run into any difficulties, let me know. So I'm just going to let that keep going, but that is it for today.